Hi, and welcome to the Selling in the Motor Trade podcast in association with CarWow, the online car-changing destination. Together, we share tips and ideas on how to sell more cars, improve your service department, and generally put more profit into your department, dealership, or dealer group. I'm your host, Simon Bowkett, or some of you might already know me as Skippy. Firstly, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hi, welcome to another episode of Selling in the Motor Trade. Today it's my pleasure to be joined with Gareth Williams. Gareth Williams is the Managing Director of Hatfields organisation, or Hatfields Motor Group, I should say. Traditionally, I would say Jaguar and Land Rover, but we're going to listen in this interview, changing into a Motor JQ as well. So I'm really excited to speak to Gareth and talk all things motor trade and how he got started in motor trade. So Gareth, for people who may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started into the motor trade?
Well, my father was always in the motor trade. He was a car salesman for Wallace Arnold and Leeds back in the 60s, and his career progressed from there. And so I grew up in the motor trade. Didn't really want to be in the motor trade, if I'm being honest, because truthfully, I have no recollection of my father before the age of 10. Never saw him. He was always at work, late night car selling, weekend car selling was always the thing. But I came out of university, finished university, and was sat at home, not really knowing what I wanted to do. And a very good family friend happened to be staying with us, who had just opened a Ford dealership. And he said to me, "Would you come and work for me?" And I said, "I'm not sure." And he said, "Look, I won't pay you a fortune, but I will train you." And he was good to his word, to be fair. I said I'd go and work for him for a year, and he put me through the Ford training courses, which at those days they were absolutely brilliant, I've got to say.
Yeah.
Superb training. And then I had another stroke of luck, really, which was Noel was very forward thinking, and Ford were trying to get their dealers to invest in the first DMS, Kalamazoo system called Darts. And he wanted to implement it into his business. And of course, because I was young, yeah, what do you do with the computer? Give it to somebody young. And he said, "Would you implement the DART system?" So I'd already been trained in parts and service and double entry bookkeeping and all of those things. And so it was a perfect fit. And I implemented the DART system into that business. And of course, just got a greater and deeper understanding and knowledge of the business than anybody at 23 or 24 could have possibly expected to have. So, yeah, it was a real stroke of luck. And then my father was working, strangely, in St Helens as well, running Sutton's Motor Group. And then he came to me. I ended up staying with Noel for 3 years. And he then came to me and said, "Look, do you want to come and work with me?" And so I did. And then a couple of years later, the guy who owned that business sadly died. There was no real succession. And my father and I then bought that business, and that is the business that we've got today.
I love the background where you've worked in every department to start with, and also Kalamazoo there. You have to know the business from the ground up, don't you?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. I'd say it was a real stroke of luck. I mean, understanding, parts inventory and obsolescence, and as I say, even to the extent of learning double entry bookkeeping and a trial balance and all of those things, just became invaluable because you understood the things that we love now about really good businesses when departments integrate and understand each other's pressures. I, of course, had the great benefit of understanding how it all worked together. You still had these crazy silos where sales didn't like service, who didn't like
Yep.
parts, and body shop. But but I understood how they all knitted together, and most importantly, I understood where the money got made and lost.
Yeah. When I started, I'm 51 now, so I started 17, and I had again luck. Where I worked in a valeting department to start with, then it was a parts department, parts van, service department. Put me on the service counter. But I was never on the tools or anything like that. But I
No,
do
it's the
believe
only thing
that.
I never did. I was never,
Yeah.
obviously, never a technician, but did
Yeah.
every other job.
But I think the grounding it gave me, it just gave me a good understanding for the whole business and similar thing.
Yeah.
In fact, when we first met, I before we come and started doing some work for you, I did my good salesperson's research, and I reached out to a guy called Paul, who is a business manager in an Audi dealership in Crewe.
Paul
And
Devlin. Paul Devlin.
you
Yeah.
remember his name? I can remember
Yeah,
his
yeah, yeah.
surname, Paul Devlin.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Paul
and
Devlin. Yeah. Paul Devlin and I were both valeters at Jaguar House in Liverpool. Well, Paul, to be fair, Paul was a valeter. I was just a, helping monkey,
helping.
really. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was a summer job. Night before, again, before university, my father, got to go and get a job. Come and work with me. Okay. And yeah, and I had 3 months working as a valeter in Liverpool. Great team of people, to be fair. And Paul was a fantastic valeter. And then he became a great salesman, and then went on and became a business manager. Yeah, but he and I worked together. He taught me a lot. He taught me a lot as well about the attention to detail and the real difference that it makes in just that extra, I don't know, I suppose effort. And that's what we seek now, isn't it? Just that little bit of added time and energy spent and some pride in your job. He was so proud of the finished job. And
yeah.
I hope I'm not embarrassing him if he does listen to this, but he was fantastic and he taught me a lot then.
Yeah, it's the pride in the job, pride in the business that rubs off on everything. And definitely working at Hatfields, you see that everywhere. Retail is the detail is something I hear
Absolutely.
all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Keep your
yeah.
standards high, and if everybody adheres to that, then you really can move mountains in this job.
So here's a question that we ask all the time. Do you remember the first car you sold? Do you
Well, I
remember?
do, but I was never a car salesman. Strangely, of all the jobs, I never worked as a car salesman. I was always
Okay.
around it, of course, but I do. The first car I ever sold was my own car. So I was working in this Ford dealership, and I'd be there in the third year. Um, the guy who owned it said, you can have a decent car. What do you want? I said, "I'd like an XR3." And I had this red XR3. This would be what, 86 on a C was. C
Right.
treble three, something, whatever. Anyway, I can't remember. Strangely, I can't remember the reg number, which is odd for me.
I
Anyway,
I
I had
love
this
that.
car.
Strangely, how many cars over the years there, but still strangely.
I remember. Anyway, but yeah, but I had this car, red XR3, and honestly, I say this with no great pride, nobody overtook me for a year. I honestly, it was like Christine went to hell and back in that. It was brilliant. Anyway, I was played lacrosse in Timpley, and a teammate of mine, a guy called Mark Garrity, coveted my car, and he said, "Can I buy your car?" And I was naive, and I said, "Well, yeah, sure." Anyway, he lived in Sheffield, and he drove to St Helens, and he bought my car. And so I was really proud and pleased. So he bought this car. Anyway, he came to collect it a couple of days later with his wife. And this is the absolute gospel truth. Come to the end of the day, sold my car and went to Jeff Teeman, who was a good man at St Helens Ford, sales manager. I said, "Oh, what am I going home in, Jeff?" And he gave me a chocolate brown Morris Ital that had come in the trade. And he said, "Oh, I'll give you this." It's like, hang on. I was in a bright red XR3 and I've just sold it for you. And I'm going home in a chocolate brown Morris Ital. Yeah, so that was a lesson. Ask the question first. So yeah, that was the first car I suppose I ever instigated the sale in.
Instigated the salad. I love that. Okay. We often say that if a salesperson doesn't like their demonstrator, sell it then. Get
Yeah,
it sold then, get it in something
yeah,
else.
but
Because
I
the other
loved
one,
that car. I loved it. Yeah, I got another one, of course, needless to say, 3 weeks later. But yeah, the 3 weeks in the chocolate brown Morris Ital, that was sobering too.
fair enough. Well, listen, in your early career, I want to see, did anyone stand out as a mentor? I'm sure your father is one of them, but also during your
Yeah.
career, anyone else who really influenced your development in the motor trade?
Well, the guy who owned the Ford dealership was a
Hmm.
guy called Noel Roberts, and he was a real character. He and my father had worked for Gerald Ronson together in the 70s. He ran Heron in was running Heron in Stockport, and so they were friends and colleagues. And then Noel went to work for Inchcape, running a group of Toyota dealers in Southeast Asia. And he
Okay.
did that for a few years. And then he came back to the UK. He'd managed to make a few quid and he bought this Ford dealership. And then it was he who said to me, "Do you want to come and work for me?" And he was a real character. And he taught me that you have to take the people with you. He was a really good leader. He probably wouldn't mind me saying, sadly he's died now, but he wouldn't mind me saying he wasn't the greatest businessman because he liked to spend money.
Okay.
And, he made money and spent money on the business and on himself. But he taught me that, there was 120 people working in that dealership in St Helens. And he taught me that you really had to work hard at the relationship with the people and get people working for you, because you didn't need that many people who didn't really pull their weight,
Mm.
for that business to go down. But also what I saw from Noel, he bought the business with the help of Lloyd's Development Capital. And they were hard. They were hard on him. And because I was a good family friend, we'd sit and have a drink after work. Those days, that's what we did, of course. Had a drink, went home. And he was under real pressure. Ford were hard masters, hard taskmasters, and Lloyd's Development Capital were too. And I suppose very early on, I got to see the other side of what owning and running a business and being responsible for 100 or so people was like. And it took its toll on Noel. But he developed the business and he got through that. But this is sort of early mid 80s. As I say, the demands of the market share were enormous. And it was a huge business. It turned over millions and made nothing in those days. But he was a really great influence on me. Not always necessarily, I learned some things from him that not to do, if I'm being honest, as well.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate again to be very close to the decision making, and I was able to sit in board meetings later on in those 3 years and really get a good understanding. But Noel was a great influence on my early days.
You said that Lloyd's Business Development Capital, that they were very hard on him and Ford was hard on him. But did they need to be hard on him? Was that one of the things that you learnt, that it was because you write about the margins, like 2% return on sales and stuff like that. Did they have to be hard to teach him how to run the business?
I don't think so, really.
Okay.
I mean, the
Okay.
trouble was, it was just another huge plate he had to spin,
Mm.
and they didn't really have a great deal of understanding. We had a board director that was put on by LDC, and in those
Okay.
days, they just sat somebody at your table, and he was a really nice fella, Peter, but he'd worked for Bass Breweries.
Yeah. How is that going to help the motor
And
trade?
he'd just sit there and come once a month, and we would go soup to nuts through everything. And of course, he'd be making comment, and he'd then feed back, and he'd be making suggestions. And you think to yourself, well, it must have been so frustrating for Noel to sit there, having spent his entire life in the industry, knowing what to
Yeah.
do, and listening to a guy who was an FD of a giant brewery saying to him, "Oh, these margins look a bit low, Noel."
Yeah.
Well, they are, it's just a fact of life. And let's be honest, LDC were also having their pound of flesh.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing, really, for Noel to
Yeah.
contend with, having to pay them,
Yep.
and then all the costs that were associated. So, of course, he was paying Peter's salary and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
And it was a financial pressure too far. But in those days, that was the only way forward. It was
Yeah.
my father and I very similarly in '89 when we bought our business. We
Yeah.
borrowed 20 million from Lombard, and then a couple of years later, interest was at 15%.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
15%. Hey, we worry about interest rates now going up, but
Yeah,
knowing
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
15.
15% in 1991, and I say we borrowed 20 million, and so the first 3 million you made, that was paying the interest bill. So it was tough, but hey, listen, we all got through it, and we're still
Yeah.
here to tell the tale, aren't we?
So this is a shameless plug for our first 90-day sales fitness training program. And I like to ask guests, is there anything that you learnt in your first 90 days? And you've covered some of this already, but anything you've learnt in your first 90 days that is as relevant today in 2025 as it was when you started in the motor trade?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, for me, it was always about presentation.
Mm.
I was winging it, really. I mean, I didn't know anything, but because of my father, and I suppose because I knew the owner of the business I was working in, people had an assumption that somehow I had some skills where really I had none. So it was all about presentation and looking the part. I was always very respectful. I was well mannered. I was always well dressed.
Mm.
I was never late. My father, because I was living at home, so my father kicked me out of bed every
Yeah.
morning. So I was always there on time. I always was smart, presentable, and I listened. And
Mm.
that for anybody now, it's those things. Turn up with the right attitude,
Yeah.
not necessarily just for yourself, because then the response you get from the people you work with is always incredibly positive. And I was so dependent on being taught, of course, by those around me that I just needed their engagement and involvement in me. And so as I say, I was well mannered, I was dressed smartly, I listened, incredibly, I wasn't that cocky. And as a result of which, they helped me. And I would say
Yeah.
to anybody starting in a business, doesn't matter our business or any business,
Yeah.
which is, be respectful and listen to people who always invariably know better than you,
Yep.
and you'll do all right.
And be that sponge
Yeah,
for knowledge, because
yeah.
actually, don't you see the young people come through now, and you can see the people who want to learn. You just want to give them more because I don't know about you, but I see myself in some of these people now coming through, thinking
Sure.
I was
No,
that.
absolutely. But Simon,
Yeah.
it's not just for the young people either.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have many people who've joined us and come onto your program, our program, shall we say,
Yeah.
who've been in the job 20 years.
Yeah.
But so what? The
Yep.
great benefit is every day's a school day, isn't it? And whether it's old stuff relearning or new stuff or new ways, we all have to adapt, don't we? And so, that's the most important thing in 90 days of any new job, no matter how old you are, is understand what is expected from you, and try your hardest to do it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I do love that. It's so true. Well, listen, with your business, you're geographically quite spread. Now, people who don't know the UK motor trade, Gareth's businesses are from Sheffield to Shrewsbury to Hull, Pickering, Liverpool. There's quite a spread there, and getting to them is must be difficult. So, how do you balance the demands of running a successful business, where you guys really do punch above your weight with what you achieve, and also a personal life? How do you get that balance right? I suppose this is a question for me because I don't think I get this balance right. It is a difficult thing. How do you get that balance right? And what does a typical week look like for you?
Okay, but the first thing to say is many lessons from my father, but one he said to me is never have a business that's more than 2 hours from home in case you have to go every day. So, but that always stuck with me. So Pickering is probably 2.25 hours.
I was just doing the maths in my head. I
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
looking at
But
yeah,
I mean, thankfully these days, I sit in the back and I get driven there. But in the early days, I didn't, of course, and that's only something recent. But yeah, but 2 hours because you've got to get up, you've got to go, and you have to go back the next day. So that's the spread. But in terms of the work-life balance, it's incredibly important for us as an employer that everybody has the work-life balance. And the truth is, of course, the higher you get up the tree, the harder that is to find. And the expectation on my senior team and their time, it's not their home time I demand necessarily, but of course, it's just about being aware and never switching off. Kim and the girls, my four daughters, are used to holidays where the phone and email is always on. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, the phone will ring, and
yeah,
fortunately we were in Barbados last week. It was lovely. But Kim's come walking out and saying at 5 o'clock in the morning, who are you talking to? What are you doing? Oh, well, I'm just, I'm up and I'm doing what I'm doing. But you get used to that, everybody gets used to that and the rewards are there. So that's part of the deal. But the work-life balance has become more and more and more important, not just in terms of people's, mental and physical health, but in terms of attracting the right people. You have to, at the outset, make them understand that I don't want people there at 6 in the morning and 8 at night, because if they are, they're doing it wrong.
yeah,
It's very important that they earn decent money and have something to take it home
yeah.
or and something to do and encourage them to do so. And that will only get worse, won't it? Well, whether it's worse or better, that remains to be seen. But you know what I mean? In terms of the amount of time at work, undoubtedly, the direction of travel is less.
But our business compared to yours is tiny in comparison. But I'm glad you said that because as a business owner, I personally find it so hard to switch off. When I'm on holidays, my mind never switches off. And
I don't want to switch off.
actually, you're right. If I was sitting on Barbados Beach, lovely as it is, at some point I'd have to be, Darren, what are we doing? Where's Andrew up to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
You just almost want to do that, I suppose. That's part of what
Well, no,
drives you.
I don't know how to do or think about anything else.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm, when I slow down, I am slowing down now in terms of the amount of time I go to work, but not the amount of time my brain is engaged in the job, but the amount of time I'm physically going to work. But as I get closer towards more retirement, then I have to change that. Then I have to find new things to think about, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talking about the industry now, we know agency was a big word in the motor trade, kind of going back 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Um, I know you're at the on the dealer council when JLR decided to probably one of the first people, I think, to put on ice the agency sales model plan. While we were recording this a couple of weeks ago, the Volkswagen Audi Group have announced that they're going to put their model on ice. Um, can you share with us some of the conversations, decisions why JLR stopped the agency model?
Yep, yeah. I mean, there was an agency steering committee, which wasn't dealer council, a separate agency steering committee of a number of investors. And we were going through the process of developing the agency model. And throughout that process, there was a constant, I suppose, nibbling away by us at, is this the right thing? How's it going to work? As it started to unfold for both sides of the fence, to be honest, for the manufacturer and for us,
Mm,
it became clear that um, it was going to be harder than anybody imagined. And at the same time, of course, Mercedes-Benz went earlier,
mhm,
and we had the benefit of the Mercedes-Benz experience. And then a couple of us, three of us really ultimately decided, said, look, we just need to bring this to a head and let's understand where we're going with it. And we got the JLR senior team on board and we met with Leonard and we expressed our concerns and our fears.
mhm,
And in fairness to them, they were completely open about, okay, talk to us, tell us what you think, tell
mhm.
us why it might not work, tell us what the pitfalls are, what does it mean to you, what do you think it means to us that we may not have thought of. And we had a really grown up conversation. And
Sounds
they came back
refreshing.
and said, yeah, no, it was absolutely. JLR are like that, to be
Yeah.
honest. They really are. They always have been.
Mm,
And they came back. And I think what the most significant thing for all the argument that you could put forward, whether it be financial or process or systems, when it comes to it, taking agency to market is hard enough when everybody is on the same page.
mm,
And I think what the senior people at JLR realized is trying to get it to stick when everybody was against it
mm.
would be incredibly hard. And they also looked at that moment in time. It wasn't going that well for Mercedes. Obviously, that's turned a corner now, and everybody thinks that's working well. And I think it can work. I really do think it can work. But just at that moment in time, it was wrong for JLR. They needed the revenue streams of good continued supply. And I think everybody could see that one of the almost inevitable outcomes of going on agency would be a drop in sales. That was almost inevitable. There would just be this blip where cars didn't get sold. And that would have been very expensive for everybody. And it
Yeah.
just seemed an unnecessary expense. Now, we've only put it on ice, as you say.
Yeah.
We all know well, it may not come, it may or may not come, because of course we could have that discussion and argument again. But personally, and I would say this openly and did to all my colleagues at the time, I didn't think that agency was wrong.
Mm,
It was just the maths. Agency can work and agency will work. I'm absolutely certain because there are so many things within agency that are good. And again, one of the things that came out of the phoenix from the flames, if you will, of agency was we tried to take the good bits of agency and put them into the new dealer agreement, which will be with us in the next couple of months for JLR, and a new model and a new way of working. So, obviously, but within the constraints of a franchise agreement. So,
yeah.
the one price, for example, we can't make
Yep.
stick. Yet we
Yep.
all understand that if we are all very similar in price, and if you take away the dealer network being at each other's throats and being super competitive on price,
Hmm.
and there are other things that are more important. So the agency model, of course, takes price away.
Yep.
And the only thing that you've then got in the marketplace is your level of service and your reputation.
Yeah.
Now, if suddenly the motor trade was about level of service and reputation alone and not about price, how much more money would we all make?
It, it,
All of
it,
us would make a load more money. Would manufacturers would, dealers would. But of course, it's really brave to get everybody to the starting line at the same time and saying, right, there's no
yeah.
more price
Yep.
competition. There's just about how good you are at the job. And for business of our size and our attitude, it was manna from heaven for me. I mean, I didn't like the deal, which is why I fought against it. But in terms of the philosophy, just servicing your local territory,
Hmm.
that's all we've ever done.
Yep.
My father used to have a saying, not interested in selling cars in Aberdeen and Exeter. And I'm really not. What's the point?
Yeah.
I just want to sell cars to local people who are going to come back, who are going to speak well of us, who have their cars serviced, who tell their friends, who tell their, neighbours and colleagues. And, it's all reputation based, rather than, big red stars, save thousands, come to me, because that's never going to work, is it? I wouldn't say at all that it was the dealers who were instrumental in changing that. It was JLR
Closely.
recognizing that actually, from when they'd made the decision, the
Hmm.
world had changed and that they needed to adapt. And we just, if you like, gave them the spark to say, look, have a rethink about this. And we gave up some margin. So they got what they wanted, which was more money for them to spend on their part of the deal, which is what I talk about with the dealer agreement. So more responsibility for JLR in terms of marketing and systems
Hmm.
and process, which was on our side of the fence. We've given
Yep.
up margin. They take responsibility. We hopefully become more unified.
Mm. It's so true under the franchise agreement that no matter what margin we have, we're fighting against ourselves all the time. I can remember a brand new 18, 19-year-old salesperson in a Toyota dealership in Australia. And the new, I don't know, Hilux or Forerunner come out. And we got together with the regional director and said, guys, there's an opportunity to make money here. Let's not be stupid. Let's not give these away. And of course, Gareth, how long did it last? A week, 2 weeks? But the franchise agreement that it lends itself to that, doesn't it? So there
It
is,
does, but also, listen, at the end of the day, we have always been our own worst enemy, haven't we?
yeah,
I mean, it was, it was ever thus. And unfortunately, the manufacturers, in the same regard, they know it and they know ultimately that it will drive a certain behavior that does, on occasion, deliver more volume. And so that's always very tempting, isn't it? So, removing that completely. And back to agency, of course, that is the risk. And it happened to Mercedes-Benz, didn't it? That business crashed in many respects, but they were big enough and strong enough to be able to
yep.
take it. And I think they've come out the other side. And certainly from the partners that I speak to have it now, they like it. It's definitely working.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, they definitely do like it. I had dinner. I was fortunate enough that I go to the National Automotive Dealers Association conference most years, actually. And
For
I
2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, 2 weeks. Well, I went on to Miami after that one, so it was. I had to see some people down there after that. But yes, you did wind me up on that one. 10 days in my defence. But there's this year the chairman is a man called Tom Castorina, and he was so. The word is. I'm going to use the word here. Scared, concerned about agency, and he's talked to me lots about what's happening in Europe, and they're all stopping it, and the dealers are just fighting against it. And scared is probably the word I'm going to use. And they were talking about how we need to stop this. The franchise model is the only way forward. And it was quite interesting how bitter the American dealers were. So you've answered this question there. You still think there is a place for it in the UK market agency at some point there? Because Americans hate every
I'm
part of
not.
it.
I'm not saying it's going to become the norm by any means, because as you said, many people have rowed back from it.
Yeah.
And whatever the franchise model continues to deliver, both for
Mm.
investors and for manufacturers,
Mhm.
why will it change? But change is inevitable and change is coming.
Yep.
And if you think about some of the brands, and I'm sure we'll get onto that and talk about the new brands in the marketplace, but some of the traditional brands and their traditional, if you like, their space, their retail space, how affordable that is,
Yeah.
I don't know. So
Mm.
you take a franchise model of somebody that, say, has 140 representation points today, in a reduced market share in a
Mm.
franchise model, might that be 70 or 80? And again, we've seen that, haven't we?
Yep.
Reduction of the number of franchise points. So whilst the franchise model may exist, it will have changed to a point where those number of representation points simply aren't there, and you're driving bigger volume through a smaller number of retailers. Now, that makes all the sense in the world, other than to the people, of course, who no longer have their businesses.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
is the problem, isn't it? Whichever way you look at it, it only is the strong will survive.
Mm.
Whether that's financially strong because you're huge
Yep.
or financially strong because you're very profitable. But one of those things has to be the answer, doesn't it?
Mm. I don't really know the answer to this, and maybe you could help me. We're in an agency model, and we'll get off agency because it's
Yeah.
I don't want to go on about it a lot, but I'm just curious, how does it affect the multiples of EBITDA or something like that there? Because if the customer's effectively owned by the OEM, not the dealer group, I'm just curious, how will that have an effect on the valuations? Will it have an effect?
Well, it will, well, certainly, obviously, firstly, the return on sales changes completely because
Mm.
in the agency model, you're not selling the car. So
Yep.
obviously, the standard turnover,
Hmm.
your return on sales, the multiple thereof, But I think the multiples will steady. I really do. I think they'll improve. One of the things that agency undoubtedly will bring is, well, when it works properly, is more consistency of profit because you won't be in a boom and bust business because you
That's a
won't
very good
necessarily
point.
have the March push, the September push.
Mm.
You will just have a natural flow of cars being sold as and when. Now, whether the manufacturer will ever stop the March push, but eventually
Mm.
it will be market pulled rather than pushed.
Yep.
So that will give greater consistency of earnings for a retailer. If
Hmm.
there's greater consistency, even though it might be a smaller amount of money,
It affects the multiple.
the reason I think that valuations of retail businesses is poor is because of the risk.
Mm.
There's always a risk that suddenly you might make nothing. Whereas actually agency de-risks the retailer, all that risk transfers to the OEM,
Hmm.
and you may make less money, but if it's
Consistent.
consistent and known, then you might get 10 years because somebody might look and say, well, that's just going to go on forever. So suddenly your multiple might be 10, not 3 or 4 or whatever it might be today. And I think that's the problem. And you won't be looking for that hot spot. And you won't have people thinking, oh, right, well, this is the time to sell my business because the job is good, because I know, in 2 years' time it might be worse. And I think it'll just steady the job completely. I really do. I really do think that. I think from an investor perspective, agency is positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And we focus on customer service, not fighting against one another. And I think customers love the idea of being treated right, customer service. And you truly believe in customer service. And it's not just a buzzword for you.
No.
Working with you for the last 3 years there, I remember a situation, I don't know if you'll remember it. There was a customer in Shrewsbury that was an influential customer. And what I mean by that was someone that would be on Google reviews. And I was thinking about Google reviews at that time. And I said, Gareth, this guy, he's a very important customer. We need to make sure we get this on right. And you replied, Simon, all of our customers are important. And it just, you stopped me. And I thought, of course, you are right. How do you spread that culture across the whole group about customer service?
Well, do unto others as you would unto yourself be done. We treat customers like we want to be treated ourselves, and I think that probably is where it all stems from. Which is, well, what would you want to happen if you were on the? And I do that myself. I put myself in the customer position and say to my staff, put yourself in the customer's position and think to yourself, what would you want, and then try and deliver that. Because actually, although some customers are overly demanding and maybe they're trying it on and they want something that they're not due, generally speaking, what they want is they just want it to be right.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it, the remedy. No, I think people make the mistake of thinking that customer service, if you give customer service, it's about cost. It isn't really. It's about, most of the time, it's about attitude. It's not that the customer's wanting. And what happens is the way customer service falls down because the person on the other side receiving either the complaint or the issue is trying to resist cost because they think this is going to cost us money. And so they resist it. Well, actually, that's not what the customer wants. The customer isn't really after the money. What the customer wants is do the right thing for me. So do the right thing. It doesn't really matter what it costs because it's about repeat customer and it's about doing the right thing because the cost is the cost, isn't it? You know what I'm saying is the cost of the remedy will not change.
No.
But actually, the only chance you've got of reducing the cost is actually by dealing better with it. And I've never known a customer issue that's got cheaper to resolve the longer it's gone on.
Oh, true. Can I add to that as well? So many times a complaint gets through to a senior management, and I'm in the dealerships, and one thing comes back all the time. No one got back to me. Would someone talk to me? And it's just, that's cost nothing. It's just deal with it straight away. But so many times I see managers want to hope it goes away. It never goes away, does it? It just gets
No,
worse.
well, I suppose one of the differences is, I mean, you've met my senior team, and because the customers can and do complain directly to us. So we're all out there. Our email addresses are there. We're published, and they come directly to me. And I don't feel that many anymore because they get dealt with before they get to me. But if customers complain directly to me, and when the staff know that myself and Craig and Stuart and Kevin are going to be dealing with those customer complaints straight off the bat, strangely, the only ones that come to us are the ones that need to come to us. And also, of course, we have a culture of empowerment. We always have had. You need to empower the service advisor, the sales controller, whoever it may be able to solve the problem there and then and not feel as though they're not authorized to do whatever needs doing to spend the money. Give that a courtesy car, whatever it may be. And I'm not talking about just pounds, shillings, and pence. I'm talking about whatever the customer needs. I need a taxi, I'll get one for you. They're not having to find a manager to get authorized for silly things that are going to be authorized.
Yep.
Once you take away those ridiculous financial controls, and I genuinely mean, I think they are ridiculous. If you think about what you will empower a sales exec or a parts person or a service advisor to do, but you wouldn't empower them to get a taxi for a customer or give them a keyring out the thing, or whatever it may be, to do. Yeah, I'm not talking about giving the money back necessarily. Things that are obvious things that change, but just empowering the people at the point with the customer. That's what gives the customer confidence that the right thing is happening, that they don't have to go into a little office and get it authorized. It's just a natural thing that when the person dealing with the customer recognizes that something's gone wrong, they deal with it and they put it right. And that makes all the difference. Happy customers and profit are the only things that matter in a business, aren't they? And that's our mantra. Happy customers and profit in that order. And it has to be in that order. You can't put the profit before the happy customers. Happy customers first, and then I tell you what, they will deliver the profit for you. Always.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That just leaves me to say that all details of this episode and other episodes on the selling in the motor trade can be found on our website, simcotraining.co.uk. Go there to get a copy of our book, Words That Sell Cars. Go there to sign up to a free trial of our Sales Fitness online sales training program. Easiest way to get hold of me is Simon Bowkett through LinkedIn. Thank you.